Hey guys, what's up? It's Audrey Steeman. Today I'm going to be talking about something that's kind of evolved over the last couple years, I feel like, with design, more specifically with graphic design and motion, and that static design is not as much of a thing anymore. Being a graphic designer and illustrator myself, I'm just noticing the trend of adding simple motion to static things is becoming it's not even revolutionary, but it just elevates things so much more, I feel like. And I think within esports too, because it is still such a new industry, the bar is still super low, I feel like, and designers out there are just trying to elevate it more and more, and I think that kind of goes along with motion design quite a bit. So today I'm going to be talking about a couple tips and tricks that I tend to use quite a bit over the last couple years with my designs, and especially with Vandal too, and just elevating a simple static design into a GIF, or dare I say an NFT. All of these should be simple enough to where anybody who's especially new to After Effects can just jump in and use them. So here you can see I just did a simple Vandal branded design using Justin as kind of the subject here, and adding some big large typography, as I tend to do sometimes, and obviously the film and grain. And then in Illustrator I'm just kind of adding in some custom elements that will just kind of help fill up the scene a bit more. So here's my After Effects file with both my Photoshop and Illustrator documents. Everything's labeled and organized. And I went ahead and made a separate pre-comp for all of those Illustrator graphics just for a little more organization, and it'll just be easier to manipulate later. Add moving grain. If you look closely, you can see a faint looping film grain overlaying the design here. And there's a couple ways you can do this, but my favorite and most customizable way is to make your own looping grain using high-res textures. I'm going to turn off this static texture we had from the Photoshop document so we can replace it with the moving one. So let's look into this moving texture pre-comp to see what's going on. You can see there's multiple layers of grain images, all 2 frames inside of a 1-second timeline, and it loops pretty seamlessly. To recreate this, I'm going to make a new composition, save it as a new moving texture pre-comp, and make sure the composition size is the same as our final. Mine currently is 1080 by 1350 pixels. We'll keep it at 24 frames per second and the duration 1 second. Now I'm going to go into my folder of project assets on the side here and just select a bunch of these to put in the timeline. So I know that each image is going to be 2 frames per second. So I'm going to select all of these layers and hit Shift-Control-D to split them and delete the extra stuff. To sequence them out automatically, select each layer from top to bottom, right-click and select Keyframe Assistant and Sequence Layers. You should just be able to hit OK, and bam, all the layers are sequenced out. So we can already start to see it coming to life, but some of the textures are a little too grainy and doesn't look consistent with the others. So I'm going to cut the grainier ones out so the loop doesn't look too jumpy. And to fill up some of the missing frames, I'll just duplicate some of these and move it around so they all look different. That's one of the biggest benefits of having high-res textures, is that you can just move it around in your pre-comp without sacrificing quality or anything. Now we'll take that pre-comp and add it to the main design comp. We made the texture loop at 1 second and need to have it repeat on its own. So pay attention because this part matters to make it work properly. Right-click on the layer and select Time, enable time remapping. You'll see 2 keyframes appear. Move the playhead backwards by 1 keyframe, go over to the left side to make a new keyframe there, and then delete that last one. You can extend the layer all the way out to the end of your composition. You'll notice that the loop stops after that keyframe you put, and this is where an expression comes in to keep that loop going. Over at the stopwatch where the time remap property is, hold Alt and click the stopwatch to open the expression input. Type loop out, but it should automatically show up after the first few letters, and just hit enter. Inside of those parentheses, type with the quotation marks, cycle, and hit enter. Now the loop plays infinitely. I'm going to change its blending mode to screen so we can see our design underneath. It's a little too bright for my liking, so I'm going to click the layer and press T for transparency or opacity and take it down to 30%. Displacement Maps. This is personally one of my favorite things to do to my designs, just because it actually looks like it was physically affected in some way, and it's super easy to do. If you look closely, you'll notice the typography is having some granular chunks kind of taken out of it and being displaced outside of the letters themselves. Since I only want the typography to have displacement, I pre-comped all of the heavy layers so the effects will only affect that. To do this displacement effect, you only need 3 layers, at least in this case. An adjustment layer on top, the layer being affected in the middle, and the texture causing the displacement at the bottom, kind of like a sandwich. So let's start from the top. Add a new adjustment layer from the layer panel. I'll add the moving grain texture we just made to the bottom and do that same time remapping process that we did for the looping grain. And if you already have a looping grain texture made in a different pre-comp, you can just copy and paste that layer. And then I'll add the displacement map effect. For the settings, first select the displacement map layer, in other words, the moving texture, effects and masks for the source, and I typically use the luminance channel and do at least 10 pixels of displacement, and stretch map to fit. Now, you can see that the pre-comp is kinda off-center, but that's because we altered the horizontal and vertical variables in the displacement effect. So to counter that, I'm just gonna move the pre-comp over back to where it should be. Sometimes you can cheat like that. Easy ease, speed graph, and posterized time. So here's the effect we're going for. And as you can see, there's some additional keyframe offsetting that we'll get to do for some more visual interest. I used my typography pre-comp again, and you can visually see how their position keyframes are staggered. I also have an adjustment layer here using the posterized time effect, which we'll add last. So I'll delete these keyframes and start from the top. At the 1 second mark, and with all the type layers selected, I'll add a position keyframe. I'll move the playhead to the very beginning and move the type out of frame, adding a keyframe there too for their starting position. So this linear movement looks boring as hell, so we're gonna select all those keyframes, hit F9 on your keyboard to easy ease them, or you can right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and easy ease. Before I stagger the keyframes, I'm gonna go into the speed graph editor. Since those 4 layers are selected, I'll click and drag over those last keyframes here and just adjust the speed curves. This is currently having it start slow and end fast, but I think the other way feels better, ending slower. Now I'll click and drag over each layer's keyframes and move them 2 frames over at a time. And from here, the movement is super smooth, which might be what you need depending on the motion design look that you're going for, but I want these to be a little choppier. So I'll add the posterized time effect back in. It automatically sets to your composition's frame rate, which is why it still looks smooth. So let's cut that in half to see less frames. And there you have it. Animated tracking. So here's the final effect, and you'll notice that the words themselves aren't moving, just the space in between the letters, which is also called tracking. So because I made the text in Photoshop, I won't be able to edit that here in After Effects, so I just recreated the text layers here in After Effects. And here you can see some familiar keyframe offsetting that I did previously. There's also another loop out expression used for this effect as well. And if I take away all of their expressions, the tracking animation does its thing once and then stops, which could also be useful in your animation too. So I'm gonna start at the 1 second mark again and delete all of the tracking keyframes. And under the layers properties, click animate off to the right and select tracking. I'll set the first keyframe to 30 so the letters start further apart. And then at 1 second, a keyframe for 0 tracking. I'll select the 2 keyframes and easy ease them. I'll adjust some timing in the speed graph editor. And then alt-click on the stopwatch to apply the loop out ping pong expression. I'll copy the keyframes and paste them to the rest of the text layers. To just see my keyframes of the layers, I'll have my layers selected and press U. And now I'll apply the same principle of staggering the layers keyframes like I did before. A bonus trick to make the loop more seamless, select all of the keyframes, hold Alt or Option, and drag that last keyframe to the 1 second mark, just so it repeats on every second. I also added the posterized time effect at 12 frames per second to be a little choppier. Scale and posterized time. So here you can see I started already playing with the motion of this top left crosshair that I made in Illustrator, and it's really just adding some scale and rotation keyframes here. So in my pre-comp of graphics under that crosshair layer, I've got this loop going at 2.5 seconds. And similarly to some of the other techniques, I just used a simple loop out ping pong expression to keep it going. So to recreate this, I'll delete the keyframes and get rid of the loop out expression. I'm gonna have their crosshairs start at their original scale at 100%. And then at 2.5 seconds, I'll make the scale 140%. I'll easy ease those and add the rotation. I'll set a keyframe at 0 degrees at the beginning, and then add a keyframe at 270 degrees at 2.5 second mark. I'll make the rotation easy ease as well. And then I'll just adjust the speed graph for both the scale and rotation properties. And here's the final ease look. Now, to apply this motion to the other 3 crosshairs, I'm literally just gonna copy and paste each property individually. So with my scale keyframes copied, I'm gonna select the other 3 crosshair layers, hit S for scale, and then paste. And it should paste those exact keyframes into their scale property. Now just do the same steps for the rotation property. Have the rotation keyframes selected and copied. Select the other layers and hit R for rotation, and then paste. I'll add an adjustment layer to go on top of all of the graphics. Add posterized time and set it to 12. And in your main design comp, here's the final look. Scale wipe. I decided to use this effect on Justin just as more of a transitional or introductory kind of thing and having him literally enter into the frame. It's almost like that stretched pixel look that's a pretty common trend in static design right now, but in motion. To do this effect, I only need Justin's layer here, and I'll apply the scale wipe effect. I already added the posterized time effect in here too. Shocking, I know, but we'll add that back in at the end. So when I add scale wipe to the layer, you'll notice nothing happens at first. The key is setting keyframes to any or all of these properties on the left. I want the direction of the wipe to go horizontally, so I'll set it at 90 degrees for now. The stretch amount is pretty self-explanatory. The higher the number, the more exaggerated the stretch is going to be. So to animate it, I'm going to add keyframes to the center factor, which is shown with this little dot that you can move around. I'll set a keyframe for the starting position first, and then I'll move the playhead to where the effect will stop, where I have mine at 2 seconds. And then you can just drag the X position all the way across until the effect is where you want it. Now, my direction is set at 90 degrees pointing right when I actually need it facing left, because that's the direction I want the effect coming in from. And from here you can just kind of mess around with the amount of stretch that you want. So now I'm going to turn the posterized time effect back on and see how that looks all together. It's a subtle difference, but I think it works out pretty nicely. Posterized Wiggle. Here you can see that there's this choppy, almost stop motion-like look to some of the elements here. And I think this is a cool effect to have when you have a lot of layers in your design, but you want to show a little bit more depth. And this can be done with just a simple wiggle expression that does all of the work for you. So when you type in your wiggle expression, it's going to come with a set of parentheses, and there you typically put in 2 numbers divided by a comma. The first number in the parentheses being frequency, which is how often it should move, and then the second number is the amplitude, essentially how far it should move from the base position. Starting with Justin's layer, I'll hit P for position, and then hold Alt or Option and click on the stopwatch to open the expression window. Type wiggle, or you can find it in that drop-down list that shows up. And in the parentheses, I'll type in 4 for frequency and 1 for amplitude. So it'll move a little bit, but it won't move very far, which is what we want. And from here, I'm just going to copy and paste this exact expression to the logo layers and graphics pre-comp under their position properties. Now, I'm noticing that the Vandal logos are kind of awkwardly butting in and out of the frame because of that expression. So I'm going to be taking some designer liberties and scaling those logo layers down by 4%. I already had an adjustment layer with the posterized time effect over Justin and the logos, so I'll just turn that effect back on and maybe even set it to 8 for more choppiness. So here's a final animation combining some of the effects from this tutorial, and I personally love how versatile all of these effects can be with whatever design that you're working with. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful in some kind of way, shape, or form. Hopefully these techniques can help elevate your designs a little bit further and can kind of help you get into the world of After Effects a little bit easier. If there's any suggestions for future videos, I would love to know. I obviously have a list of ideas of things that I know how to do and things that I might find relevant personally or would hope that you would find relevant. But if there's anything specific that you guys are looking for that isn't really out there in terms of design and some motion related things, illustration, that kind of stuff, I would love to be the person to help you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.